Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. I wanted to show you my newest project. It's a 1973 Chevy Nova. It's a 4-door. It's green on green. It's all kinds of bad. But this thing actually has what appears to be a pretty decent motor and transmission, but it hasn't been running in a long time. And my project here is to get this thing running again, get it back on the road, and just kind of clean up some things, try to spruce this thing up just a little bit. A, so that I'm not embarrassed to drive around in it, and B, to eventually sell it and maybe make $1 or $2 on it. So I picked this thing up from my buddy Kyle. We had actually gone in partners on this car a few years ago. I had used this car for a couple of tech articles for magazines. One to upgrade the ignition, one to get rid of the old exhaust manifolds and put headers on it, and in the process of that I dressed up the old 350, just gave it a fresh coat of paint and some Holley finned accessories, and that cleaned it up pretty good, but it's still, it's kind of just surrounded by a bunch of dirty junk, so there was a lot more cleaning left to be done. So this thing was super dirty from just sitting for years, so one of the first things on my list was to get this thing cleaned up, get some of that old mold and mildew off of there. I used mostly soap and water. I didn't use anything really abrasive, but I did use a Brillo pad on some of the trim, like the bumpers. I also used the Brillo pad on the glass. The outside of the glass just had a film of grossness on it, so I used that Brillo pad, and that helps cut it off without scratching anything. One of the most high-dollar things on the whole car are these wheels. They're 16-inch Pontiac Trans Am wheels. You would have seen them like on a GTA. Started cleaning on a little bit of the interior and in the trunk, but I'm actually just going to save that for another day. It needs a lot of work, and I'll move on to that other stuff another day. So this thing is a 1973 model, and by that time Chevrolet had pulled the plug on everything with horsepower. And even though this thing has one of the higher option engines, it's still just like 140 horsepower. It's a 350 with a 2-barrel, and I mean, it's a dog. But it's got some potential, and that's one of the things that me and Kyle had worked on, getting rid of some of the smog pump, the smog stuff, just getting this thing kind of stripped down to just a bare bones 350. What I didn't realize is that the brakes had seized up. 3 out of the 4 wheels would not roll. So when we got this thing off the rollback, I mean, it was stuck right there where he put it. So I guess priority 1 was getting this thing rolling. Priority 2 was to get it running. I didn't really think it would be that big of a deal, but lots of things can happen while these things just sit around out in the weather. I pulled this thing in, I started taking some pieces and parts off of it and kind of evaluating what I was up against. Tried to spin the thing over, and the first thing I realized is that we never hooked the starter wire back up when we put the headers on it. Poured some gas in the carburetor, got this thing to fire off a little bit. The issue was that it wouldn't run on anything other than what we poured in the carburetor. I fooled with it enough to determine that the fuel pump was bad. That's just something that happens on these things that sit around for a long time. The diaphragm kind of gets rotten in there. Anyways, I put a new fuel pump on it. Happened to have one laying around here. It's always handy. Bolted it on there, spun it over a few times, and noticed that we were getting some gas. Fired it up a few more times, realized some vacuum leak issues, got those things buttoned up, and fired this thing off, and it sat there and idled pretty nicely. Although it sounds terrible. This is the worst sounding car. A bone stock 350 with open shorty headers is bad. My neighbors probably hate it because it's ugly and it sounds bad. Like there's nothing really good about it. But I did get it to run. The next step, because I had fooled with those drum brakes trying to get them to turn, I was using a pry bar and getting them broke loose and hammering on the drum and just trying everything I could. Cranked it up. I put it down in gear and it tried to nudge just a little. Then I put it in reverse and it would nudge a little bit backwards. And I finally got this thing broke free enough to where it would move on its own. Part of the issue that I was dealing with was that I didn't have much of a brake pedal. I had replaced the master cylinder with a new one, and I hadn't yet bled the brakes because I knew I was probably going to have to work on these brakes anyways, and I just wanted this thing to move on its own. So anyways, I didn't have much of a brake pedal, and I finally got this thing moving and got toward the end of my driveway and panicked a little bit and started to hit the brake. Well, I didn't have a brake, so I mashed it harder, had just enough brake pedal to send a little bit of fluid, and it locked up the right front wheel. So this thing was stuck. I mean, it was seized up tight. And drug the jack all the way out there, which was just as loud as the car running. Go out there and jack the thing up, jerk the wheel off of it, finally get the brake drum peeled off. And I realized that the wheel cylinder was leaking pretty bad and that the flex hose was pretty rotten. So one of those two things is what was causing the brake to lock up. I happened to have some leftover drum brakes off of this Chevelle and got it to where it would roll. I went ahead and adjusted that brake all the way in to where there was hardly any tension. Then me and Carly hopped in it and we took it down the road. And again, this thing had little to no brakes. Probably not a good idea, but I knew that with the brakes dragging, that it wouldn't get up to very much of a high speed anyways. So we took off down the road and the brakes were dragging so bad that this thing was just like laboring just to get down the road. And luckily we made it back, even though the thing shut off a couple times. Once it got a real big load on it, it just couldn't take it anymore and shut off. The timing was way out of whack, transmission fluid was low, brakes were dragging. That is the worst combination you could ever have for your first drive. But we did it anyways. We went ahead and went down the road and back. I hit the brakes on this thing and it had nothing. But since all four brakes were dragging, it kind of stopped itself, so no big deal there. We got the thing back in the driveway, thank goodness, and I just kind of walked away for a few days. Didn't try to dwell on the fact that this thing was a long ways off from actually driving. I've just spent a couple of evenings on this thing, just picking away at different things, getting it to where it will crank up and drive under its own power. And so far I haven't spent any money. The parts that I used for it, I put a little gas in there, which I had for the lawnmower. I had to put a wheel cylinder and a brake hose on it, which I had that I took off the Chevelle. The things that I've used so far, the fuel pump for instance, all of that stuff I had sitting here. from previous projects or whatever. So far I haven't spent any money, and I hope to continue that low budget theme. I'm going to share with you everything that I spend on this car, which is going to be drastically low. Like, this thing is not getting anything fancy. It's really going to be a budget friendly 4-door family cruiser. But for right now, it's kind of at a point where I can take a break on it. I can regroup, see what kind of parts that I do need to buy for it, and just take it from there. So I hope that you'll stay tuned. Hope you hit that subscribe button and hit that notification bell. You'll get notified every time we post a new video. And sometimes I'll post Hot Rod Hoarders, sometimes I'll post a garage update. And this car is going to be a pretty regular feature vehicle on my videos. So I'm going to show you some of the things that I do to it to give this thing a good look, some of the things I do to it to make it run and drive good down the road. So stay tuned. Thank you for watching.